The shot cracked through the morning like lightning splitting the sky. I heard it before I saw anything. The sharp echo rolling over my grandfather's ranch, followed by the wild panic cries of the horses. My coffee slipped from my hand, splattering on the porch. But I didn't care. I was already running. Boots pounding the packed earth, heart thudding in my chest, I rounded the corner to the stables just as the pale light of dawn hit the valley. There she was, Patricia Whitmore, the HOA president herself. Her Range Rover gleamed like a pearl, parked square across my gate like she owned the place. And there on the ground, right at her feet, was my stallion, Thunder, bleeding from a graze across his flank. That was the morning everything changed. I'd never gone looking for trouble. The new development next door? I barely noticed it going up. Just another pocket of city folks building their cookie-cutter luxury ranch homes, throwing up fences and wagon wheels, pretending they belonged out here. My grandfather would have found it hilarious. Their idea of ranch living was sipping wine on a wraparound porch while a landscaper trimmed their grass. But he was gone now. Left me 200 acres of hard ground and harder history. And I'd be damned if I was going to let anyone take it from me. That morning had started the same as any other. Checking fence lines before breakfast, the way my family had done every single day since before Texas was a state. And that's when I saw them. Dozens of bright orange survey stakes driven into my pasture. They cut through my best grazing field like a scar, lined up neat and tidy, each one tagged with a cheap little flag that read, "Property of the Meadows at Silver Creek HOA." I'd barely finished pulling the first one when I heard tires crunching on gravel. Patricia's Range Rover rolling in like it was parade day. She stepped out wearing designer boots that had never seen mud, her iPad clutched like a general's clipboard. "Mr. Cooper," she called, smiling like we were neighbors at a barbecue. "I see you're interfering with our community improvement project." I planted the stake back in the dirt between us. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this here's private land. Always has been." She tapped her iPad with one manicured nail, like she was about to read me scripture. "According to our community charter," she said, "this historic trail provides essential access to the creek. We're simply restoring it for our residents' enjoyment." I laughed. Couldn't help it. "Historic trail?" I asked. "Only trail running through here is the one my cattle cut heading to water." Patricia's smile turned cold. "Times are changing, Mr. Cooper. The Meadows represents progress. We've had several complaints about your operation, the smell, the noise, the equipment. This trail project is just the start of necessary improvements." That was when I felt it. My grandfather's temper, the one he always told me to keep under control, rising up like a dust storm. "This is a working ranch," I said, "not your personal petting zoo." "We'll see about that." She turned sharply, climbing back into her Rover. "The board meets next week. I suggest you attend. We'll be discussing your violations." I watched her drive off, dust coating her shiny paint. Then I pulled out my phone and called Bill Martinez. His family's ranch was here before mine. If anyone knew what Patricia was up to, it was Bill. "Violations?" He chuckled. "Boy, you can't violate rules you never signed up for." "But watch yourself. That woman's been stirring up trouble all over. Told me last week my cattle were improperly housed." I looked across the field. The new homes were sprouting up like weeds, inching closer by the day. If Patricia got her way, that so-called historic trail would cut my land in half. That wasn't just a nuisance. It was war. Later, I found myself back at the stables, replacing the last of the pulled stakes. I heard the whinny of horses and glanced up. There she was again, her Rover crawling along my fence line. And that was when I knew. This wasn't about trails or noise complaints. This was about getting me off my land. 3 days later, I woke to shouting outside my window. I threw on boots and a hat and found Miguel, my foreman, squaring off with a crowd of folks in matching athleisure outfits. Patricia stood at their head, of course, her iPad raised like it was going to save her. "These animals are a health hazard," she yelled, gesturing toward my cattle. "The smell is destroying property values." I bit back a laugh and walked up slow. "Morning," I said. "What's the problem?" Patricia didn't miss a beat. She tapped on her iPad and pulled up some official-looking document. "Municipal Code 47.3, she announced. "Livestock must be kept 500 feet from residential properties." Your cattle pen is a clear violation. I shook my head. That ordinance doesn't apply to agricultural land that's been here longer than your houses. Her smile turned sharp. Not for long. We've filed a petition to have this land rezoned. The Meadows is expanding. Your quaint operation doesn't fit our community's vision. Before I could answer, a familiar truck pulled up. Sarah Chun, the local vet. She jumped down from her rig, medical bag in hand. Is there a problem? She asked, her tone calm but firm. Patricia straightened. We were just discussing the health risks these animals pose. Sarah raised her tablet, a rugged, well-used machine that made Patricia's shiny iPad look like a toy. Funny, she said. I've got complete health records here. This ranch has some of the highest standards in the county. Patricia's group wavered. A couple drifted away, suddenly remembering their morning jog. But Patricia wasn't finished. She pointed to the creek. What about water quality? Our residents are finding brown water in their taps. I narrowed my eyes. That creek's been clean enough for our cattle for 3 generations. Maybe check the plumbing in your brand new houses? Patricia flushed. The board will hear about this. I shrugged. Every other property might have signed on to your HOA, but this one hasn't, and it never will. As if on cue, one of my bulls let out a bellow. Patricia's followers jumped. Sarah smirked. Patricia wasn't done. We're having another board meeting tomorrow. We'll be discussing mandatory HOA membership for all adjoining properties. I suggest you show up, or you can wait to hear it from our lawyers. I watched her group retreat, heads down. Sarah stood beside me, shaking her head. She tried this with Bill last month, she said. Claimed his horses were too noisy for their sunset yoga. How'd that work out? Sarah grinned. He started hosting team roping right at sunset. I laughed, but the humor faded fast. Patricia wasn't making idle threats. I'd seen it before. 1,000 little cuts, regulations, ordinances, fees, until ranchers had no choice but to sell. You coming to that meeting? Sarah asked. I nodded. Yeah, I'll be there. The next evening, I walked into the Meadows clubhouse. It was all polished wood and fake Western decor, the kind of place someone designs when they've only ever seen ranches on TV. But I wasn't alone. Bill was there. Sarah, too. We sat at the table like old gunslingers waiting for the showdown. Patricia stood up front, her iPad hooked to a big screen showing aerial photos of my ranch. As you can see, she said, the Cooper property is blocking our community's natural growth. Tonight, we'll vote on measures to bring this area into the modern era. I studied the photos. Drone shots, recent ones. You've been flying drones over my land, I said. We have every right to document violations, she replied. Then she switched the screen to a video of my horses grazing near the fence. These animals threatened our residents, she said. I pointed at the screen. That's footage of your people trespassing and trying to hand feed them. They're a menace, Patricia snapped, just like your cattle. She called for a vote to force all livestock to the far side of my property. Bill stood up. You can't vote on land you don't own. You're not part of this association, Patricia said. I'm part of this community, he shot back. Sarah stood next, holding her reports. Forcing livestock away from water sources violates county regulations. I have the paperwork. Patricia's mask cracked. This isn't about rules. It's about progress. She mentioned my grandfather, as if that would scare me. I pulled out my phone. You're right, I said. Times have changed. I hit play. Footage popped up on the screen. Patricia, wire cutters in hand, cutting my fence under cover of darkness. I was removing an unsafe structure, she stammered. You were making a gap to let my horses wander into your neighborhood, I said. The room went silent. One of the board members, Tom, spoke up. You told us that fence was on HOA property. Patricia's iPad slipped from her hands. I held up another document. And here's a letter from the county about your illegal water rights scheme. The room exploded into whispers. Tom stood. I moved for an emergency meeting tomorrow. Without Patricia, she bolted, but I knew she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Storm clouds gathered as I left that clubhouse, and I had a feeling Patricia's next move was going to be her most desperate yet. The storm broke before dawn. Thunder rolled over the hills like distant cannon fire. I was up before it hit, the old ranch dog pacing at my heels. I wasn't sleeping much these days anyway, not since Patricia had made it clear she wasn't finished. Then the alert came through. Motion sensors at the gate. Multiple vehicles. I pulled up the camera feed and there it was. Her Range Rover, lights slicing through the dark. And she wasn't alone. 3 more cars followed her, their headlights glowing like eyes in the storm. I grabbed my coat and my rifle and ran. My boots hit the mud hard as I crossed the yard. Lightning lit the sky just long enough for me to see the stable doors hanging wide open. Horses screamed inside. That was when I saw her. Patricia Whitmore stood in the doorway of my barn, holding up her iPad, recording like she was filming the final scene of a drama she'd spent months scripting. Her people were inside, scattering something across the floor of the stables. The stench hit me then. Feed soaked in something chemical, sharp and bitter. Poison. I hit dial on my phone. "Sheriff," I said, "I've got trespassers at Cooper Ranch. They're trying to poison my horses." I didn't wait for the response. I was already moving. "You're finished, Cooper?" Patricia's voice cut through the rain. "When animal control gets here and sees your sick livestock, they'll shut you down for good." Another set of headlights swung into the drive, tires spraying mud. Sarah's truck fishtailing to a stop. She must have picked up my call on the emergency channel. Old Bill wasn't far behind her, his old pickup rattling as it climbed the rise. Then more lights. Neighbors, ranchers, even a couple folks from the meadows. Word travels fast out here. Patricia's followers saw the trucks and scattered. They ran for their cars, peeling off into the dark. But not her. She stood her ground, rain pouring off her hair, mascara streaking down her face, still clutching that damn iPad like a weapon. "I'm recording everything," she screamed as I closed the distance. "You can't stop progress, Cooper. This filthy, backwards life you're clinging to, it's over." "The only thing I'm stopping," I growled, closing the space between us in 3 long strides, "is you." I slapped the iPad out of her hands. It splashed into a puddle, the screen cracking as it hit. Patricia shrieked like I'd struck her. She spun to run but slipped in the mud, landing hard. Designer boots are no match for Texas rain. Then came the red and blue lights. The sheriff's deputies rolled in fast. Sarah was already inside the barn shouting orders. "Get my kit from the truck! Keep the horses away from that feed!" Patricia scrambled to her feet, slipping again, covered in mud. She pointed at me as the officers approached. "It's him!" she screamed. "He attacked me! He's destroying property values! I was protecting our community." "By trespassing," said a voice behind her, "and attempting to poison livestock?" Tom, the HOA board member from the meeting the night before. He stepped into the light holding up his phone. "I followed you after your emergency HOA defense meeting," he said. "I've got it all on video. You told them exactly what to bring. You told them exactly what to do." The deputies didn't need any more convincing. Patricia fought like a cornered bobcat, screaming about rights and bylaws as they cuffed her and led her to the back of a cruiser. Her followers were already in other cars, looking anywhere but at her. The rain slowed as dawn broke. Sarah walked out of the barn, wiping her hands on a towel. "Horses are fine," she said. "We got here in time. Rain helped keep them away from the worst of it." Old Bill clapped my shoulder. "Guess she didn't understand one thing about ranch country," he said. "We look out for our own." I looked around. It wasn't just ranchers standing there in the mud. It was families from the meadows too. Some of them had kids sitting in their trucks, watching wide-eyed. People who'd come here looking for something real, and found it. The weeks that followed were a blur. Patricia faced charges. Serious ones. Livestock endangerment in Texas isn't something you can lawyer your way out of. The HOA booted her, fast. Tom was elected president before the month was out. His first order of business? Drafting a resolution to protect existing ranches and ensure no HOA would ever try something like this again. "You know," Tom said to me one morning over coffee at the diner, "most of us moved out here because we love this place. The land, the history. We didn't come here to bulldoze it." I nodded. "My grandfather used to say good fences make good neighbors, but good neighbors don't need fences." The old man would have been proud of how things turned out. The meadows changed after that. Slowly, but it changed. Families brought their kids out to the ranch on weekends. Sarah started a program teaching them about horse care and ranch life. We opened up a small trail on the edge of the property, lined with Patricia's old survey stakes. Funny how something meant to divide us ended up bringing people together. Now every morning, I still walk the fence line, check the stock, watch the sun come up over land my family has worked for generations. But these days, when I wave at the neighbors, they wave back. And they mean it. This place will never be what it was 100 years ago. That's not how time works, but it can be something good, something honest, a balance between tradition and progress, as long as people respect what's been here all along. As for Patricia, she's history, but the lesson she left behind, that's carved into the dirt out here now. A reminder that you stand your ground for the things that matter. And when you do, you won't stand alone. The fight for Cooper Ranch was over, but its legacy was just beginning, and I wasn't going anywhere.